Welcome to a reading of my book, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 1, Section 2, Consciousness, the Obscure. Some theorists, such as Martin Heidegger and Jürgen Habermas, eschew the concept of consciousness as an inadequate and misleading idea. Others, like Daniel Dennett, regard it as an illusion spawned by error and lack of clear perception, courting the criticism of not accepting that consciousness exists at all. Richard Rorty similarly holds a disappearance theory of mind that talk about mental states is an anachronistic remnant of outdated thinking. He maintains that the concept of mind is incoherent, and even that the two constitutive cognitive and non-cognitive states don't seem to have anything in common except our refusal to call them physical. I will argue against such materialist views in Chapter 6, as well as expose a not so hidden agenda of wanting one scientific method to apply to the mental as well as the physical. There is, nevertheless, unexpected accord between materialism and the obscurity of mind that I formulate here in terms of an error theory. We both want to dispel this obscurity, yet my purpose isn't to demonstrate its non-existence, but rather to reveal its neglect. We can thereby turn the accusation of error and misperception back upon the materialists themselves. It is they who fail to see clearly, and for reasons that we can explain in terms of both inappropriate methodology and a surprising opacity of consciousness. Yet further unexpected affinity can be found in doubts about both the viability of mind-matter dualism and its intuitively appealing foundation based upon the immediate experiences of self-awareness that appear to be radically different to the non-conscious existence of physical objects. Beliefs about experiences and feelings can be put in question by, for example, the fallibility of memory, perception, and psychological refusals to admit that one is not happy, compelling a false belief that one is happy. Additionally, although we are beings whose self-awareness ostensibly constitutes the essential feature of our existence, and Descartes' cogito ergo sum endorses that distinction as infallible, that awareness of ourselves is unexpectedly clear and philosophically undeveloped. The concept of self underlying that intuition is an a posteriori creation, as is the notion I think, which may be assumed and superfluous to the claim I am. The cogito ergo sum enjoys then a presumed certainty, as Paul Ricoeur describes it, which on examination can be deceived about itself. In this inquiry, it can also be said that self-awareness is attributable with a misleading assurance of a unitary personal identity which has not been subjected to the possibilities of division and graduation. The idea of a division of personality is commonly understood, yet not widely understood ontologically, or to the extent of threatening the basic unity of personal identity, to be discussed later. Graduation introduces the idea of degrees of self-awareness and hence degrees of certainty, and thereby raises a certain equivocation with respect to personal existence. This brings both relativity and diminishing clarity to the hitherto absolute certainty of personal existence and ushers in the beginning of an error theory of mind. I'm not talking here about the obscurities of the unconscious, in which a large part of our mind is hidden and recalcitrant to observation. I'm also not talking about standard problems of knowledge or cognitive bias, or even the accumulated effects of small and not so small choices or biases which build into a bulwark of error. Neither am I talking about the limits of psychology, the countless hidden sources of each human experience, religious mysticism, a lack of concepts, and linguistic inadequacy to describe the qualia of mind, or materialistic accounts which set everything within one scientific framework, or their preference for objective over subjective explanations, or even the rigour and precision within analytic philosophy, which can lose sight of humanity and life experience. I am, however, talking about a pervasive yet neglected tendency of the human mind to forget itself, to regress into unawareness, and to overlook its attributes and even its own existence. Like fish, which are not aware of the water they swim in, consciousness is the pervading dimension of the human condition, of which humanity is often unaware. Fish and animals are uncontentious examples of limited or obfuscated consciousness. Fetuses, infants and chimpanzees bring the limitation closer to our own experience, as does human evolution, advances from objective to subjective accounts of morality, and pervasive materialist attitudes to life, which confuse physical and ideological means with subjective ends. Neither physical nor abstract objects can be ends in themselves, or stand in for the immediate experiences of consciousness. The developmental psychology of Piaget and others presents a similarly revealing progression of perception and understanding from infancy to adulthood. Other intermediate conditions can be found in neurosis and paranoia, which show confusion between the patient's and other people's mental states. Psychology of perception also uncovers systematic mistakes about the objective status of seemingly external properties, such as colour. In the 19th century, Ludwig Feuerbach's psychological projection theory of religion gave us another example of limited self-awareness and misperception, where human attributes and values are projected into and construed as another, albeit spiritual, reality, where they can be given mythological shape and form. Crispin Wright tells us that it is only in fairly recent philosophy that psychological self-knowledge has come to be seen as problematic. But the difficulty isn't just that of resolving a known and clearly understood problem. There was a time in recent history when we did not know that we did not know about self-knowledge as consciousness. This cloud of unknowing began to be lifted by Descartes' discovery of consciousness, then regarded as transparent, Kant's phenomenology of mind, and the advent of psychology as a systematic study of mind. Even 100 years ago, Edmund Husserl was still able to lament that what we lack above all is a certain general insight into the essence of consciousness in general. In the present day, John Searle expresses similar concerns in his book The Rediscovery of Mind. Bernard Williams refers to a pervasive obscurity in our idea of consciousness, and David Chalmers tells us that we are entirely in the dark about how consciousness fits into the natural order. Adding to this confusion is an ambiguity not significant in regular discussions about differences between the concepts of mind and consciousness, noted by theorists such as Barry Dayton and Max Wellmans. The more general notion of mind includes unconscious and preconscious states that, strictly speaking, cannot be conscious, and consciousness has misleadingly come to represent a variety of faculties like belief, thought, awareness, pre-reflective animal consciousness, and reflective human self-consciousness. The latter reflect the preferred meaning in this work. Dainton and Thomas Metzinger further distinguish, though slightly differently, the phenomenal self from a psychological self and its third-person perspective of facts, respectively. It thereby becomes easier to understand how the study of mind has been associated with psychology, whereas the study of consciousness has been associated with phenomenology. Outright omission and neglect of mind can be easily detected in such approaches as 19th century science and logical positivism, as well as, despite protestations their hears, in philosophical materialism, behaviorism and analytic philosophy. This neglect is advertised by the numerous unresolved issues in ethics, value, purpose, truth, objectivity, personal identity and free will, which remain largely opaque and enigmatic, yet can be illuminated by an appreciation of consciousness. Personal identity and free will, for instance, are dependent upon the existence of self-consciousness, and in the case of the latter, a correlation can be observed between the absence or presence of free will and animal or human consciousness, respectively. Yet peculiarly, the concepts of consciousness and self-consciousness have not been widely used as keys in unlocking these conundrums. Perhaps most egregiously, the very definition of mankind has employed features such as rationality, language, morality, creativity, culture, and an ability to employ symbols, but the key element of reflective consciousness, which make all these possible, has received much less attention as mankind's defining feature. In practically every case, consciousness has been neglected, overlooked, and understood in terms other than itself. Following the annoying practice of Freudians and Marxists to take denials as evidence for their theories, we can at least make a similar claim over the neglect and even the denial of the existence of consciousness. In mitigation of this neglect, a growing historical appreciation of subjectivity and consciousness is evident in philosophy, psychology, and even in science. But until very recently, this has not yet amounted to a widespread appreciation and application of consciousness as either an investigative tool or a topic of inquiry. To the contrary, presentations of the concept are still often met with skepticism. Yet this should be expected as part of the development through different levels of human consciousness, from antiquity to the Renaissance and the modern world, visible in religious belief and expressed in art and science, as well as in the social sciences and philosophy. The relatively modern philosophical approaches of phenomenology, existentialism and postmodernism have given a much needed emphasis to the significance of subjectivity, and particularly in the work of phenomenologists such as Edmund Husserl and Jean-Paul Sartre, an attempt has been made to render consciousness explicit and examine it with sufficient clarity to apprehend it in its own terms, features and structures. The widespread and historical neglect of mind, and particularly consciousness, calls for an account of how this ubiquitous entity in human life has come to be overlooked. We can start with an analogy from Empedocles' discovery of air in the 5th century BC, which illustrates how one can be oblivious to a medium with which one has intimacy and in which one is immersed. It isn't just the fact of the existence of air was once taken for granted, but the possibility or need of such a dimension was not conceived of. Only when the Greeks started to consider why water did not flow into upturned, submerged vessels did they introduce the notion of air as something which filled the empty space. Then questions like what holds up birds in flight began to make sense. Once the pervasive yet hidden reality has been perceived, other examples of discovering the obvious became more apparent. Such include the Copernican revolution and Newton's discovery of gravity. Like consciousness, it is possible to completely fail to see their everyday and ubiquitous presence until we recognize the possibility of both their existence and their absence. A similarly amazing oversight can be found in another comparison between the discovery of consciousness and the early 15th century discovery of linear or artistic perspective by Filippo di Ser Brunelleschi. Ordinary perception involves the convergence of orthogonal lines towards a single vanishing point, and as Paul Coulter explains, the apparent size of an object decreases with increasing distance from the eye. This fact is present in every observation of the world, but incredibly it was omitted from every artistic representation until the 1400s. Similarly, in the burgeoning discovery of consciousness, human beings are eminently conscious and self-conscious, but awareness of the fact is unexpectedly lacking. In both the discovery of perspective and the further discovery of consciousness, a phenomenon is open to both view and to immediate experience, yet is realized retrospectively and requires some further insight and conceptualization in order to be rendered explicit. Consciousness has been hidden in plain view, and this syndrome calls an error theory to explain this remarkable oversight. In section 3 is titled Preface to an Error Theory of Consciousness.